Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome everyone again to our daily Ramadan reminder. Today with Shaykh Abbas, Yunas, who gave us a really edifying reminder last week. And I believe it's the same thread, inshallah, that you're going to continue pulling on from last week, if I'm not mistaken, Shaykh. As ever, we have the comment box. We had some very, very good questions last week. So for those tuning in, please do use the comment box for any questions for Sheikh Abbas. But without any further ado, I'll hand it over straight to Sheikh Abbas here.
Barakallah feek. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim tasliman kathira. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma alamtana. Innaka antal alimul hakim. So in continuation of this theme around character, akhlaq, I thought that this week it would be apt to address one of the issues that can result in why character may be difficult to attain to, or there may be barriers or obstacles in the way of attaining to character. That's not to say that, character isn't attained. We naturally attain it, regardless of whether we think we're working towards good character or bad character, whether we even know what good or bad character is. We are, by virtue of being in relationships, in homes, in societies, communities, we're attaining something. What form of character we're attaining and the quality, you may say, of that character, that can be discussed, and that differs from person to person. So we're always in attainment of character. But when we talk about the obstacles to character, or things that may put, let's say, a veil over our pursuit of character, we're talking essentially about good character and the type of character that is praiseworthy, and the type of character that ultimately cultivates, nurtures, and improves the human condition, and not character that brings a person down and instills in a person those types of traits that humans generally recognize as being negative and blameworthy. Now, one thing that can often be a obstacle, or more so a veil to character, is what we think of ourselves. So the notion that we have about ourselves versus the truth about ourselves. So what we think of ourselves versus what is in truth the case about who we really are. And the two are very different. Who we really are at a kind of grand meta level, we are human beings created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and placed upon this earth in order to undertake the duty that God had intended for us on this earth. So in our essence and in our truth and in our reality, we are all, as individuals, an abd, a servant, a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And being abd, or being this servant, means that we are always in a relationship of servitude to someone or an entity greater than us. We're in servitude to a being greater than us. We can never be in a position of having absolute authority over anything or anyone in this existence. So that's the truth, that's the meta truth with regards to who we really are. On a more, terrestrial human level, who we really are is explained by, our temporary form, you may say. So if we have a reflection upon ourselves, and we take a moment and just think about the vulnerabilities and the frailties that accompany our bodily form. So generally, we always think about, we always tend to remember good, and we always tend to want and desire pleasant things, nice things, good things. But when we're in a position where we're ill, or we're in loss, or something's absent from our lives, we tend to remember the vulnerabilities that we live with. So, for example, there's a different joy in birth, witnessing birth, and a different, that's a different experience to witnessing death. Witnessing death reminds you of temporality, it reminds you of frailty, it reminds you of vulnerability, and it tends to put things into perspective. Witnessing witnessing birth brings joy, happiness, and gratitude. So these conditions that, at a very human level, they can explain, who we are and what the truth is in our case. And the truth is, in our case, that while things are good in our lives, we can enjoy the human emotions that come with that good. And when things change in our lives for the negative, or in the form of a test or a tribulation, we remember in those situations our own limitations. So in reality, though, if we take that as a whole, the truth is that human beings are quite frail and vulnerable creatures. And I think I personally see this almost on a daily basis when I look around, the area that I live in, or my neighbors and so on, and some of whom are very old. And just a chat with them here and there reveals that, the vulnerabilities, limitations, and frailties of life are very much at the forefront of what they're thinking about. And this is despite having lived 80 plus years of a fulfilling life for them. At this point in life, they tend to see, where their limitations are, and often brings me to think about the fact that, life is quite limited and frail in many cases. So if we take that as a truth of our lives, that can often contrast with what we think of ourselves. So the avatar or the emoji or the profile picture that we put up of ourselves perhaps doesn't always balance out, or doesn't always exist comfortably with what the truth is in life. Why? Because many of us probably have views of ourselves that don't always reflect the truth of the case. And this, the ulama sometimes call it an illusion. We live this illusion about who we are, or who we think we are, versus who we really are. Now, there's a story in the Mathnawi of Maulana Rumi, which is quite apt in describing this situation. So a young man lives in a culture in which, they would go to a barber and get what we understand as tattoos. They would put blue ink on the end of a needle, and they would get some type of art or form or picture or something tattooed onto the body. And so this young man goes to a barber, and he says, he's a young, strong man. So he goes to the barber and he says, I want a lion, and a vicious lion at that. Right? I want that tattooed onto my body. And the barber asks him, where do you want it? And he says, I want it on my shoulder, the back, my shoulder blade on the back. And he says that it has to be a vicious lion, like a roaring lion. Perhaps because this young man, thought that this so-called avatar is the most appropriate representation of what he saw as himself. If someone, a young, strong man goes into a tattoo parlor and says, I want, a small, sweet, cute cat on my shoulder, people would think of him in a different way as to him going into a parlor and saying, I want this vicious, ferocious lion on the back of my shoulder. So he had this view of himself that, that was represented in this lion, this vicious lion. So the barber tells him to take his place, and begins to prepare his the needle, and he pricks the needle onto the young man's shoulder blade to begin the tattoo. And the young man lets out a cry as soon as the needle pricks him, and he lets out a cry and he holds his shoulder, and he says, "Oh barber, you almost killed me. What was that?" And the barber says, "Well, I'm beginning to give you the tattoo that you wanted." He says, "Well, what body part did you start with?" And he says, "The tail." He says, "Forget the tail. I don't want the tail. Start with something else." So he gets comfortable again, and again the barber then prepares his needle again and pricks him again in order to begin the tattoo. And this time he yells out loud and holds his shoulder in pain and says, "What have you done?" And the barber says, "I'm just giving you the tiger that you asked for." And he says, "Well, what body part are you starting now?" And he says, "The ear." And he says, "Well, forget the ear. I don't want the ear. Just start with something else." And then again, the barber prepares the needle and begins to, goes to tattoo the young man and pricks him again with this needle with blue ink on it. And the man again lets out a big cry and holds his shoulder blade and almost crying now at the pain that he's feeling with the prick of this needle. And he says, "Well, what is it now?" And the barber says, "Well, I've started the belly." And he says, "No, I don't want the belly. Forget the belly. Just carry on with the rest of the lion." So the barber becomes distraught at this point, and he just stands there for a long time with his fingers in his teeth. And then he just throws his needle to the ground and starts to lament and says, "What on earth is happening here with you? Whoever saw a lion without a tail, a head, or a belly?" He says, "Young man, God himself did not create a lion like this. And how do you expect me to do this?" So the moral of the story is that sometimes you think of yourself in a particular way, but when you come into contact with reality, the perception that you had of yourself crumbles away to reveal a truth. And in this case, the young man saw the best representation of his state, or saw the best image that represents his state, the best so-called avatar that represents his state, as that of a ferocious, angry, roaring lion. And the truth was that he was something akin to the cute cat, and not really the lion. But that illusion that he thought, or that he saw existing for himself, was a veil between him and recognition of who he is. Now, one of the early, one of the early Salaf tells us a story in the same, in the same context of this idea of illusion as a veil between the individual and character and virtuous traits. So he tells us the story of a king who one day wakes up in the morning and decides that he wants to go out that particular day, and he wants to go out into his dominion, into his kingdom, and he wants to show the people his power and his might and his riches. So he wakes up in the morning and he summons his assistants and servants, and he says to them, bring my best clothes today and dress me my best clothes, because we're going to go out on this we're going to take out this caravan of people and horses and so on and so forth, and we're going to show the people in our town my greatness. So he wakes up in the morning and he asks for his best clothes, and his servants come and they bring him a set of his best suits and clothes, and he rejects all of them, and on the basis that they're not they're not great enough. So they come back with another set, and again he rejects it. They come back with a third set, and then he sees these clothes that are that very ostentatious and something to turn the eye, and he accepts them and he puts them on. And then he summons his servants again and he says, prepare all of our horses and all of our people and our soldiers and so on and so forth in order to go out. And so they all prepare themselves in the grounds of his palace. And when he comes out and he sees this great caravan of people and horses and might and power, the shaitan comes and just blows into him, and suddenly he kind of fills himself with this arrogance. His chest becomes puffed out and his head becomes high, and he sees and he feels this great sense of worth and might inside of himself. And so he orders for the gates to be open, and they make way into this town, and they're proceeding along the road. And an ordinary man wearing disheveled clothing, and someone who just doesn't really stick out from all of the other people, appears in front of the king's horse, and he grabs the horse by the bridle and he pulls it. And the king becomes surprised at this moment and says, who on earth are you, and what have you just done? You've done something that's very serious. And the man says, I have a need. I need to tell you something, or have a need from you. And the king doesn't even look at him and tells him, just signals, be away from me, get away from me. And the man says, I can't. I really have an urgent need that I need to speak to you about. So the king then says to him, well, wait until I dismount and then you can speak to me. And the man says, no, the issue that I need to speak to you about cannot wait. So he pulls the horse again. And there's a back and forth, and finally the king relents and says, fine, tell me what your need is. And the man says, it's a secret. I cannot say it out loud. Give me your ear and I'll whisper it to you. So again, after some resistance, the king finally lends him his ear, and the man whispers into his ear and says, I'm the angel of death. And in that moment, realizing that this man really has come as the angel of death in the form of a human being, all of the pompousness and all of the displays of arrogance and ostentatiousness and so on, suddenly, all of that suddenly just disappears as though it wasn't there and it's worth nothing. And the man says to him, I've come to take your life in this moment right now. And the king, stuttering, says, well, let me at least go back and see my family one last time. And the man says, no. Then he says, well, at least let me go back and gather my wealth and distribute it and organize it properly. And the man says, no. And he says, is there anything I can do to delay the inevitable? And the man says, no. And then in that moment, he takes his life. In contrast, on the same day, this angel of death goes to another man, an ordinary man this time, and comes to him and says, in the human form, he comes to him in the human form and says to him, I have a need from you, just out of the blue. And this particular man turns around and says, of course, how may I help you? And he says to him, I have something I need to tell you, but in secret. And the man says, of course, and lends him his ear, and then he whispers into his ear that I'm the angel of death and I'm come to take your life. And this man, in contrast to the king, smiles and turns around and says, Alhamdulillah. He says, I have been waiting for this moment for years. And now that you finally come, this has given me great joy and happiness, because this was the only thing preventing me from meeting my Lord. And then the angel asks him, well, do you have anything you need to do before I take your life? And the man says, nothing. Nothing is more important than beginning this transition into the hereafter. And then the angel says to him, well, is there any particular form that you want to be in when I take your life? And the man asks him, well, is this something that you can promise me, that you can fulfill? And the angel says, yes. And the man says, in which case, let me pray. And when I'm in my sajda, when I'm in prostration, take my life then. And so the man prays 2 cycles of prayer, and he goes into his sajda, and the moment that he's in his sajda, the angel of death takes his life. These 2 stories are analogies and metaphors for life. The king had in him traits of character that were blameworthy and negative, particularly arrogance. And that arrogance manifests itself in the form of showing people his might and his power and his riches, because he thought to himself that he's better than them in terms of wealth, power, and riches. So he had this arrogance in him based upon his power and his wealth. And this is what he thought was the case. He thought the case was that I have this power, I have this wealth, and I'm better than the people, and they're nothing to me. And this was shown in the way that he wouldn't even look at someone who would ask him a question. But the moment he came into contact with reality and the angel of death came to take his life, all of that just dissolved away. None of it meant anything to him. So what he thought he was contrasts significantly with who he really was. And in that moment, the angel of death took his life. Whereas for the second man, he was a virtuous man. And the virtue that was in him and the character that exists inside of that man meant that when the angel of death came to take him, and this man came into contact with truth and reality, the truth and reality did not significantly change who he was, but revealed who he was. Whereas for the first person, the king, that contact with reality significantly changed the illusion that he had. So it showed the illusion that he had, it revealed the illusion that he had. But for the second man, there was no illusion. And all it did, that contact with reality revealed the truth of what he contained. And character is like that. Sometimes we allow illusions about ourselves to be a veil between us and good character. But character is something that we nurture and we develop such that when realities in life come into contact with us, there's no illusion that needs to be removed. Rather, when we come into the contact with that reality, the character that's contained within comes forth and engages with that reality. So may Allah give us tawfiq in nurturing good character and cultivating it within our states and in ourselves and in our homes and our families. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam rahmatullah.
Sorry, you froze on my screen for a bit. Sorry about that. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry, everyone, for that slight delay as well on my end. My apologies. Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. Now, where are we? Okay, it seems that we have one comment, but I'm not sure if this is just a polite salam to you, Shaykh, or if there's a question coming up. So I'll let said person continue typing if indeed they do. But Jazakumullah khair. Those anecdotes and stories and parables were very, very it's a wonderful medium to share these aphorisms. So Jazakumullah khair for sharing. We've not had that in this Ramadan actually in that forum. So that was very, very that was particularly edifying for us. If you just bear with me, just keep an eye on the comment box, inshallah. And is this your last session with us?
I think so, because we have less than, well, I assume next Wednesday maybe Eid. So
Yes.
yeah, so I think this will be the last one.
Okay. Well, it looks as though this week, after last week, we had a bit of a flurry of questions. This week, I think the reminder has been one of those which is so, mashallah, beneficial that you stunned everyone into silence. If that's the case, inshallah, Shaykh Abbas, we'll conclude it. We'll let everyone get back to their pre-iftar du'as and prayers in this blessed hour of the day, inshallah. And we pray for you and your family, inshallah, all these rewards are accepted. And tawfiq for the remaining nights, inshallah.
To all, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.